In the annals of psychological research, few studies are as infamous as the Stanford prison experiment. Conducted in 1971, this experiment sought to understand the psychological effects of power, authority, and identity. Led by Professor Philip Zimbardo, it transformed Stanford University's psychology department basement into a mock prison. 24 male college students were randomly assigned roles as either guards or prisoners. The researchers aimed to observe how these individuals, all deemed psychologically healthy, would adapt to their assigned roles. What unfolded over the next 6 days shocked the world and forever etched the Stanford prison experiment into the history of psychology. The experiment quickly spiraled out of control as the guards became increasingly authoritarian and the prisoners began to exhibit signs of extreme stress and submission. This descent into brutality forced the researchers to halt the experiment prematurely, raising profound ethical questions about the nature of human behavior and the limits of scientific inquiry. The Stanford prison experiment remains a subject of intense debate and scrutiny, its legacy a complex tapestry of scientific discovery and ethical controversy. This essay will delve into the experiment's origins, its methodology, the shocking results, and the enduring impact it has had on our understanding of human nature. The Stanford prison experiment was born out of a desire to understand the dark side of human nature. Philip Zimbardo, a young professor at Stanford University, was fascinated by the power of situational factors in shaping behavior. He questioned whether the brutality often seen in prisons was solely the result of inherent personality traits of guards and prisoners, or if the environment itself played a significant role.
I hypothesized that the roles people occupy, even in artificial settings, could exert a powerful influence on their actions and attitudes. By stripping individuals of their identities and assigning them arbitrary roles of power or powerlessness, I believed we could create a microcosm of the prison system and study how these roles impacted behavior.
The experiment, funded by the U.S. Office of Naval Research, was designed to explore the psychological effects of perceived power, authority, and identity within a simulated prison environment. The researchers aimed to create an immersive experience that would blur the lines between reality and simulation. They meticulously crafted a prison-like environment in the basement of Jordan Hall, complete with cells, a solitary confinement room, and a designated space for guards to observe and control the prisoners' activities. Little did Zimbardo and his team know that their experiment would soon escalate into a chilling demonstration of the power dynamics inherent in such situations. At the heart of the Stanford prison experiment lay a profound question. What transforms ordinary individuals into perpetrators of cruelty? Zimbardo, inspired by Milgram, sought to unravel the psychological mechanisms behind the Lucifer effect. This concept describes the transformation of human character when individuals succumb to power and authority. Zimbardo's hypothesis centered on situational forces shaping behavior. By stripping identities and immersing them in power structures, he observed conformity to roles. Beyond the broader exploration of the Lucifer effect, the Stanford prison experiment had a specific aim: to understand the psychological effects of imprisonment on both prisoners and guards. The researchers wanted to examine how the experience of being incarcerated, even in a simulated setting, impacted individuals' mental and emotional states. They were particularly interested in the psychological mechanisms that contributed to the development of prison pathologies, such as learned helplessness, de-individuation, and the erosion of personal identity. Zimbardo and his team hypothesized that the prison environment itself, with its inherent power imbalances, social isolation, and lack of autonomy, could foster psychological distress and behavioral changes in both guards and prisoners. They believed that the constant surveillance, loss of privacy, and arbitrary rules enforced within prisons could create a breeding ground for psychological trauma and erode individuals' sense of self-worth. The experiment was designed to observe these dynamics in a controlled setting, to see how the participants' behaviors and mental states were affected by the simulated prison environment. The researchers were also interested in exploring the psychological impact of power on the guards. They wanted to understand how the experience of wielding authority, even in an artificial setting, could alter individuals' perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. The experiment aimed to shed light on the potential for abuse inherent in positions of power and to examine the psychological factors that might contribute to the dehumanization of others. By studying the interactions between guards and prisoners in the simulated prison, Zimbardo hoped to gain insights into the complex interplay between individual psychology and situational forces that shape behavior in real-world prison settings. Zimbardo and his team created a realistic mock prison to study the psychological effects of imprisonment. They used the basement of Jordan Hall at Stanford University. The basement's drab walls and limited light provided an isolating backdrop. It was divided into a cell block, guard station, solitary cell and yard. Cells had only a cot, thin mattress and sanitation bucket. The guard station overlooked the cell block. The solitary cell was a small, dark closet. The yard was a narrow strip of concrete enclosed by high walls. The basement was transformed into a stark, oppressive environment. The Stanford prison experiment relied on 24 male college students, recruited through newspaper ads and campus flyers. They were screened to ensure psychological stability and health. Participants were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. Guards wore khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. Prisoners wore smocks and stocking caps stripped of personal identities. Before the experiment began, Zimbardo and his team established a set of rules and procedures to guide the behavior of both guards and prisoners. The rules, designed to create a realistic prison-like environment, were strict and often arbitrary. Prisoners were required to address the guards as Mr. Correctional Officer, stand at attention whenever a guard entered the cell block, and request permission for even the most basic activities, such as using the toilet or speaking to one another. Failure to comply with the rules resulted in punishments ranging from verbal reprimands to push-ups and solitary confinement. The guards, tasked with maintaining order and enforcing the rules, were given considerable latitude in how they chose to exercise their authority. Zimbardo instructed the guards to create an atmosphere of power and control, emphasizing that they had the authority to determine the prisoners' daily routines, restrict their privileges, and punish any infractions. However, Zimbardo also explicitly prohibited the use of physical violence, emphasizing that the experiment was intended to study psychological, not physical, abuse. The rules were designed to create a clear power differential between the guards and prisoners, fostering an environment ripe for the emergence of dominance and submission. The researchers hypothesized that the guards, emboldened by their newfound authority and the anonymity provided by their uniforms, would gradually adopt more authoritarian behaviors. Conversely, they expected the prisoners, stripped of their identities and subjected to constant surveillance and control, to become increasingly passive, obedient, and demoralized. The stage was set for a social experiment that would challenge conventional notions of human nature and the power of situational forces. The Stanford prison experiment commenced on a sunny Sunday morning in August 1971. 24 ordinary college students were thrust into an extraordinary situation. Guards, in uniforms with whistles and batons, underwent an immediate transformation. Prisoners, stripped of their identities, were issued ill-fitting smocks and numbers. The transformation from students to prisoners and guards was swift and unsettling. Both guards and prisoners embraced their roles with unexpected zeal. As the experiment progressed, the guards, emboldened by their perceived authority, began to assert their dominance over the prisoners with increasing force. What started as attempts to maintain order quickly escalated into psychological abuse and humiliation. The guards devised increasingly creative and degrading punishments for even the slightest infractions.
We made them do push-ups, stand at attention for hours, and restricted their bathroom privileges.
The prisoners began to exhibit signs of distress and submission. They became increasingly passive and withdrawn, their earlier defiance replaced by helplessness. The guards' constant surveillance and arbitrary rules created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. The escalating abuse at the hands of the guards did not go unchallenged for long. On the second day, prisoners, pushed to their breaking point, staged a rebellion. They barricaded their cell doors and refused to come out. Emboldened, they shouted insults and challenged the guards. The guards, shocked and angry, struggled to regain control. They responded with swift and brutal force. Reinforcements arrived, breaking down barricades and overpowering prisoners. Prisoners were stripped, sprayed with fire extinguishers, and their belongings thrown out. The guards became even more authoritarian and abusive. The prisoners were left psychologically scarred. Despite the guards' efforts, the experiment began to unravel as the psychological toll on both guards and prisoners became apparent. The prisoners exhibited signs of extreme stress, emotional breakdown, and psychosomatic symptoms.
I experienced acute anxiety, uncontrollable crying and disorientation.
His distress became so severe that researchers released him after only 36 hours. The guards began to exhibit disturbing behaviors. Their psychological abuse became increasingly creative and cruel. They seemed to derive pleasure from their power over the prisoners. The experiment created a toxic environment where both the powerful and the powerless were corrupted. Ethical objections and escalating distress led Zimbardo to terminate the experiment after only 6 days. The guards, initially apprehensive, quickly adapted to their newfound authority. The anonymity provided by their uniforms and sunglasses created a dangerous cocktail of unchecked power. Their behavior transformed into deliberate acts of humiliation and control. The prisoners, stripped of their identities, became objects to be manipulated. The guards exhibited a range of behaviors, some more extreme than others. Some guards remained passive, enforcing basic rules. Others relished their power, devising dehumanizing ways to assert dominance. They implemented arbitrary rules and meted out punishments. The prisoners became increasingly passive and demoralized. The guards, emboldened by the prisoners' submissiveness, continued to push the boundaries of their authority. They implemented new rules designed to further restrict the prisoners' freedom. Failure to comply resulted in swift and often humiliating punishments.
We made them ask for permission for everything.
The guards took pleasure in devising punishments that exploited the prisoners' basic needs. Sleep deprivation became a common tactic. Food was used as a tool of control, with guards withholding meals. These acts of cruelty chipped away at the prisoners' sense of dignity. Psychological tactics created an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust. This strategy divided the prisoners and consolidated the guards' power. Some withdrew into themselves, becoming sullen and unresponsive. Others lashed out in anger and frustration, met with brutal retribution. The simulated prison transformed into a pressure cooker of negative emotions. As the experiment progressed, the behavior of some guards became increasingly sadistic and disturbing.
One guard, nicknamed John Wayne, relished his role as the ultimate authority figure. He implemented harsh rules and punishments, devising cruel tasks for the prisoners.
His behavior was not an isolated incident. Other guards, emboldened by the lack of consequences, adopted similar tactics.
The prisoners began to exhibit signs of severe emotional distress. Some broke down crying, begging to be released. Others became withdrawn and apathetic, resigned to their fate.
One prisoner went on a hunger strike to protest the inhumane conditions. The guards placed him in solitary confinement, interpreting it as a challenge to their authority.
The researchers began to have second thoughts about the ethics of their work.
Christina Maslach, a graduate student, was appalled by what she witnessed. She confronted Zimbardo, challenging him to justify the experiment's continuation.
Maslach's pleas convinced Zimbardo to terminate the experiment after only 6 days.
The Stanford prison experiment revealed a chilling truth about human nature and the powerful influence of roles and environments in shaping behavior. Even in artificial settings, the lines between right and wrong can become blurred with alarming ease. The escalating tension within the mock prison was palpable, the atmosphere heavy with a sense of dread and despair.
The turning point came when Christina Maslach, a young graduate student, paid a visit to the simulated prison.
Her visit, intended as a casual observation, quickly transformed into a confrontation with the disturbing reality.
As she walked through the cell block, she was struck by the palpable tension and the sight of authoritarian guards.
Maslach's discomfort grew as she witnessed the guards engaging in psychological abuse. Outraged, she stormed out of the mock prison, forcing Zimbardo to confront the ethical implications of his work. As the fifth day of the Stanford prison experiment dawned, the situation inside the mock prison had deteriorated significantly. The guards, increasingly erratic and cruel, seemed driven by a toxic mix of power and boredom.
The prisoners, broken by relentless psychological abuse, exhibited signs of extreme stress and emotional exhaustion.
One prisoner, in a desperate attempt to escape, began to exhibit symptoms of a mental breakdown. He screamed uncontrollably, begged to be released, and even smeared his cell walls with feces.
The guards, instead of recognizing his behavior as a cry for help, responded with even harsher treatment.
The other prisoners, witnessing this, retreated further into themselves, their silence a testament to their despair. The Stanford prison experiment reached its breaking point with a quiet conversation that exposed its moral bankruptcy. Christina Maslach, a young graduate student, visited the mock prison at the request of her boyfriend, Philip Zimbardo.
What she witnessed shocked her and led to the experiment's premature termination.
Maslach was appalled by the conditions inside the simulated prison. She confronted Zimbardo, demanding to know how he could allow such psychological abuse.
I was initially defensive but taken aback by Maslach's pleas.
Her outrage forced Zimbardo to confront the truth. He had allowed his scientific objectivity to cloud his moral judgment. Shaken by Maslach's condemnation, Zimbardo decided to terminate the experiment after only 6 days. The Stanford prison experiment revealed how situational forces can drastically shape human behavior. Participants quickly conformed to their roles, with guards becoming abusive and prisoners demoralized. The guards' behavior escalated due to perceived power and lack of oversight. Prisoners became passive and withdrawn under relentless psychological pressure. The experiment highlighted the profound impact of situational factors on behavior. Section 2. Ethical Concerns and Reforms. The Stanford prison experiment ignited a fierce debate about the ethics of psychological research. Critics argued that Zimbardo and his team had crossed a line, subjecting participants to psychological harm. The American Psychological Association revised its ethical guidelines for research involving human subjects. The revised guidelines mandated informed consent and minimized the risk of harm. The Stanford prison experiment also impacted prison reform, highlighting the dehumanizing effects of imprisonment. It sparked a movement to improve prison conditions and provide inmates with education and mental health services. The experiment's legacy is a complex one, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. Section 3. The Stanford prison experiment's legacy. The Stanford prison experiment remains one of the most influential studies in psychology. Its findings provided valuable insights into the power of situational forces to shape human behavior. The experiment's legacy continues to be debated, relevant to psychology and societal issues like conformity and authority. Its dramatic findings captured the public imagination, sparking debate about human nature and ethics. The experiment's story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even a feature film. Its findings resonated with awareness of the dangers of unchecked power and institutional abuse. From Abu Ghraib to police brutality debates, the experiment's lessons remain timely. The fragility of human nature. The Stanford prison experiment stands as a chilling testament to the fragility of human nature. It showed how easily ordinary individuals can succumb to power and a toxic environment. The findings forced the world to confront an unsettling truth. The capacity for cruelty resides within each of us. The experiment highlighted the profound influence of situational forces in shaping human behavior. The guards, initially unremarkable students, became increasingly authoritarian and abusive. The anonymity and power created a toxic brew that eroded their moral compass. The prisoners, stripped of their identities, descended into helplessness and despair. The Stanford prison experiment serves as a stark warning against the dangers of unchecked power. It reminds us that even in civilized societies, the potential for tyranny lurks beneath the surface. The lessons urge us to remain vigilant against the abuse of power and to cultivate empathy and compassion. Section 2. A legacy of questions. The Stanford prison experiment remains a source of debate and controversy. Ethical shortcomings, lack of informed consent, and potential psychological harm have been widely criticized. Methodological flaws and the lack of a control group are also points of contention. Despite criticisms, it remains a cautionary tale about situational forces and ethical considerations. The experiment's findings continue to spark debate, prompting us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. Its legacy is a reminder of both the potential and perils of scientific inquiry.